بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه ما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We hope and we pray that everyone is doing well, inshallah ta'ala. And we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses us all with good health and good wealth, and that He increases us both in this life and the next, and grants us forgiveness and paradise, inshallah ta'ala. To proceed, part of our Dawah Discourse is that we will, inshallah ta'ala, this one? Okay. Part of the Dawah Discourse, inshallah ta'ala, is that we will be, bi'idhnillah ta'ala, going over some Dawah topics, obviously. Today, inshallah ta'ala, we will be discussing some Dawah arguments. So these are not necessarily, so when we say the word argument, a lot of people might be confused about this. We're not encouraging arguing. We're saying that these are points that a person can make in the course of da'wah, and of course they serve for us, first as Muslims aslan, in terms of why we believe in what we believe in, and then it also serves as a method, inshallah ta'ala, as a template. So there are many stories, many examples in the Quran. In fact, arguably, a third of the Quran is of the stories of the prophets. May the peace and blessings be upon all of them. Prophets like Prophet Musa alayhi salam, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, Prophet Isa, Jesus, many other prophets, Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, and so on and so forth, in terms of how did they call their people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how did they call people to God. And we should try to emulate that. And by engaging in da'wah, the beautiful thing is that a person can now relate to and understand a third of the Quran that before was merely stories. Now, we're not saying that obviously if you're not engaged in da'wah, maybe you don't appreciate them. Of course, a person would appreciate them. Every practicing Muslim, aslan, to begin with, by default, they should be giving da'wah within their own capacity. This da'wah does not mean that you're standing on a street corner handing out pamphlets. It means that you're giving good advice to the people around you. You're talking to people, you're engaging, you're public about your Islam, you're not hiding it, etc. There are certain cases where it might be wise to actually not be public about it. And inshallah ta'ala, today we will actually be discussing one such example that exists in the Quran itself. So like we said, the Quran itself is full of examples of how to give da'wah. We will, inshallah ta'ala, be discussing today a specific example in which we don't even know the name of the person giving da'wah. He's not a prophet, he's just a regular guy, he's a regular man. And this man is known as, in the Quran, as Mu'min al-Fir'aun. He is the believer of the family of Pharaoh. So this is his nickname given to him by the scholars. And even in the hadith literature, his name is such, Mu'min al-Fir'aun. Right? We know his name because of an amazing story that happened in comparing this believer to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was compared to this individual because they both did a very similar thing and they both said the same thing. And it seems as if Abu Bakr actually quoted this man, meaning this happened after this surah was revealed. So, where does this, first off, let's answer that question, which is, where does this story occur? This occurs in Surah Ghafir. It's known very popularly as Surah Ghafir. However, in the tafsir literature, it's actually known as Surah Al-Mu'min, the surah of the believer. And a lot of people might not realize this, is that a lot of the surahs in the Quran have multiple names. Just because we put one name in the Mus'haf doesn't mean that that's actually the only name that it has. And we know that in Islam and in Arabic in general, that the more important something is, the more names that it has. This is why the Quran, the Book of Allah, has a lot of names, like the Book of Allah. We don't just call it the Quran, right? We call it the Word of Allah, the Book of Allah, the Blessed Book, the guiding book, etc., etc. Hudan, it's guidance, etc. Hablullah, it's the rope of Allah. All of these things are names for the Quran. There are, of course, within the Quran itself, there are surahs that have multiple names and surahs that only have one name. Surah Ghafir is one of these. So in actually a majority of the literature of tafsir, this surah is known as Surah Al-Mu'min, not necessarily as Surah Ghafir. However, both are correct, inshallah ta'ala. There's no problem in using either or. Now, when we call it Surah Al-Mu'min, we're actually explicitly naming it after the believer that's mentioned in this surah, because it's not mentioned anywhere else explicitly. He's mentioned here explicitly, and this is the only place in the Quran in which his story explicitly appears. His story goes on for about 3 pages. Today, inshallah ta'ala, we probably will only have enough time to cover maybe the first half of his story, inshallah ta'ala, and then perhaps the next time we can cover the second half, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So, it appears in Surah Ghafir, this believer, Mu'min al Fir'aun, so he was of the family of Pharaoh. Ibn Kathir and others mention that he was related to Pharaoh. In fact, some of them go as explicitly as saying that he was the cousin of Pharaoh himself, and that he actually, perhaps at one point in time, was in the succession line to be the leader. And this is why there were many people who actually said that this man, was more deserving of the leadership than Pharaoh himself, the Pharaoh who declared himself and what he did and persecuted Musa alayhi salam, etc. So he was Pharaoh's cousin, and he was of the family, and he was close to everybody. He's an Egyptian, he's not from Bani Israel, but he believed in Musa alayhi salam. Now, why did he believe? How did he believe? We do not know the exact details. It seems to be the case that he was already disinclined from his own religion. Meaning he knew that, when Pharaoh is calling people to worship him, he clearly knows that he's my cousin. He's not God, right? He's not. And so by having this proximity to Pharaoh, to this dictator, to this tyrant and oppressive person, he clearly can see his true nature, unlike, for example, people from the regular public who might be fooled by that public image that the person is putting on. So, being his cousin, being close to him, he sees that this is all fake. This guy is not that much. So it seems, perhaps, as Tahir ibn Ashur and others have said, that this person was disinclined to his own religion anyways. Number one. Number two, it seems to be the case that when Musa came to visit Pharaoh and presented the signs and made his argument, made his case for why they should worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and why they shouldn't be upon, polytheism, etc., that it seems to be the case that he was convinced of this. The first thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about the man, and like we said, it's in Surah Ghafir, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقَالَ رَجُلٌ مُؤْمِنٌ مِنْ آلِ فِرْعَوْنَ يَكْتُمُ إِيمَانَهُ, and a man from the family of Pharaoh who has hidden his iman, yaktumu, meaning he is not necessarily hiding it, but he hasn't professed his faith publicly yet. Now, a few things here. Number one, it is permissible for a Muslim to not be public about their Islam under certain circumstances. Obviously, the reason why we declare our shahada is that people know that we are Muslim. In fact, it is necessary for other Muslims to know that you're Muslim so that they can establish your rights that you have as a Muslim. Rights of inheritance, for example, rights of being said to salam, rights of burial procedures, rights of proper washing, rights of visiting you when you're sick, rights of, helping you during economic distress, etc., which obviously everybody's entitled to that anyways. But we're saying that there's a more so because the person is Muslim. Okay? So by professing and being a part of the Muslim community, there are certain rights that the person is afforded, and there are certain responsibilities as well. When a person hides their Islam, these cannot be established, and this is why we don't recommend it. However, under certain circumstances, like this person, right, it is allowed for a person to not necessarily be public about their Islam. Now, why did this person hide his Islam? This verse comes right after Pharaoh threatened Musa alayhi salam with death by killing him. وَقَالَ فَرْعَوْنُ ذَرُونِ أَقْتُلْ مُوسَى وَلْيَدْعُ رَبَّهُ. And Pharaoh said, let me kill Musa and let him call upon his Lord, meaning he's doubting whether Allah can protect him. Okay? And let him call his Lord. He wanted to kill him. He wanted to murder him. At this point, so the story, this verse happens right after Pharaoh says this, and then Musa alayhi salam, وَقَالَ مُوسَى إِنِّي عُذْتُ بِرَبِّي وَرَبِّكُمْ. Then Musa alayhi salam, he makes dua and he says, I seek refuge in my Lord and your Lord from every tyrant, from every oppressor, not just from Pharaoh. This is an excellent, beautiful dua. And Allah did protect him. Allah answered his dua, meaning Pharaoh could not kill him, and he did not. Okay, even when it looked like, khalas, they had no escape, right, at the ocean. In front of them is the army, behind them is the sea. There's no escape. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them an out. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saves people. When we think that there is no solution, there is no way out, there is no relief, that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends the relief. And this is how our faith has to be. We have to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we have to have faith that He will help us and He will save us no matter what. طيب. So the believer of Al Fir'aun, as soon as he hears that Pharaoh is threatening Musa to kill him, he decides to speak up. Yet he does not profess his faith yet. And in the beginning, he projects himself, he portrays himself as merely a person who is going to give them good advice. I'm one of you, and he is one of them. He's of the family. But he's saying he's trying to stop him from killing his fellow believer, his prophet that he believed in. He's trying to tell them, don't do this. And now he has to appeal to their logical senses. And in this, there's actually a huge dawah technique that I cannot overemphasize, which is when we talk to people, we shouldn't talk to them as if we are outsiders. We shouldn't talk to them as if we are not one of them. Especially if we're born and raised in this country. If we're giving da'wah to people who are fellow Americans, we have to give da'wah to them as if we are one of them. We fear for this country just like they do. We are worried about what's happening just as they are. We're worried about the future of our children just as they are. We're worried about our salvation just as they are. We're worried about what's going on in the hereafter. Our hereafter, their hereafter. We want them to be saved. It has to come from a genuine sense that we are actually a part of this society. It's not like if we a lot of our immigrant forefathers that came to this country, not all of us obviously that are listening are the children of immigrants, but I'm saying a lot of times the people who pioneered a lot of the da'wah were of the immigrant mentality, and they always gave it as if they were outsiders, right? Giving it to kind of like people who are they're not from, or they're not with them, or they're not of them. But now we have to really give, especially the second, third generation Muslims and Muslims that have been in this country for hundreds of years, we have to give da'wah to our fellow countrymen as if we are of them, because we are of them. It's not as if we are of them, and we have to kind of change that mentality. We want the same things. A lot of people are looking for the truth in this day and age, right? A lot of people are looking for answers to big questions now that everybody's asking. Islam, wallahi, has the solution for all of these problems. Islam has the truth, and we have to deliver it to these people. We have to show them where that truth is, inshallah ta'ala. So, going back to this. قال رجل مؤمن من آل فرعون يكتم إيمانه أتقتلون رجلا أن يقول ربي الله. Are you going to kill? So this is what he asks. He says the first question after he hears that Pharaoh is threatening to kill this person, to kill Musa alayhi salam. He says, are you going to kill somebody who's just saying my Lord is Allah? Why are you going to kill him for this? Meaning he's trying to appeal to his sense that this isn't a killable offense. He's merely professing a different religion. So what? Why kill him? So right now he's not giving any arguments. He's just merely trying to make sure that Musa is safe. Why do we need to kill him? There's no need to kill him. This is not something that's killable. He has a different religion. He's saying, this is my Lord. On top of this, وَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ. And then he says, he came to you with some proofs from your Lord. He had miracles. He made arguments. He made his case. So then, the believer of Al Fir'aun, he says, so let me present to you two hypotheticals. Consequences of whether he's truthful or a liar. And this was used, by the way, in also Egyptian society at the time of Yusuf alayhi salam. When they couldn't discern whether Yusuf was lying about the lady, the mistress, or not, they brought a witness, and the witness said, well, if he's lying, then we would see this. And if she's lying, we would see this. Would be the hypotheticals. And then when they looked at the evidence, they realized that Yusuf is saying the truth and the mistress is lying. And so this man is using the same rhetoric, which is presenting a hypothetical. Look, if I'm right, this is what we'll see. If I'm wrong, this is what we'll see. If Musa is right, this is what will happen. If Musa is wrong, this is what will happen. And a lot of times whenever we present, just as an FYI, whenever we present our information, our argument, our proofs, We always have to be fair in the sense that, look, if I'm right, well, 1, 2, and 3. If I'm wrong, 1, 2, and 3. But whenever people say I'm right because of 1, 2, and 3, and they never entertain the possibility that they could be wrong, you automatically know that what they're saying isn't actually a truth, because it has to be falsifiable. And this goes to the like in epistemology, and I'm sorry, this is a little technical, but in the science of epistemology, if I am presenting for you a theory that I want you to adopt, okay, an idea, I have to present to you both cases. I have to say, look, if I am right, we will see 1, 2, and 3, and if I am wrong, we'll see 1, 2, and 3. And if the person is wrong, khalas, because it's a theory at the end of the day, and it has to be testable. It has to be, okay. So this is why we have to this falsibility test is actually very important in a lot of different areas, especially when we're talking about epistemology. How do you know that? How do you know that what you know is the truth? So we can falsify it. We can test it. So, for example, I'll give you like in the science arena, this appears a lot, but it can appear in almost anything else. Einstein, when he presented his theory of relativity, he said, if I'm right, 1, 2, and 3 will happen. If I'm wrong, 1, 2, and 3 will happen. He presented it like that, and he actually said, the falsibility, you can falsify it by doing 1, 2, and 3. And people were able to do experiments later on to confirm that actually so far it's true. And we say so far because in science, we could have a test later on that will actually falsify his theory, and then we'll move on. Just like before him, Isaac Newton. His theory worked up until we could falsify it. And then we had to throw it out. It works on smaller scales, but on larger scales it doesn't help us anymore, and we have to move on to a new theory. And that actually shows you the progression of knowledge, inshallah ta'ala. So, going back to this, the believer of Pharaoh was fair in that we know he's going to present two hypotheticals. If Musa is right, then these are the consequences. And if Musa is wrong, these are the consequences. And he wants them to look at both, because they'll realize that when in looking at both, they'll realize not only shouldn't they actually kill him, but actually leave him preach. This is what he was arguing. We'll see after he presents the two hypotheticals, and we'll present them inshallah ta'ala. But that perhaps maybe Musa is right, and he wants them to entertain that possibility. So he says, here's the hypotheticals. وَإِن يَكُ كَاذِبًا فَعَلَيْهِ كَاذِبُهُ. If he is lying, then upon him is his lie only. Meaning, if he is lying, if Musa alayhi salam is a liar, his lie will only affect him. Doesn't really matter that much. Because the fears of Pharaoh are unfounded, and he's going to present why those are unfounded. He's just preaching to a false religion. It's okay, it'll only affect him. Number one. وَإِن يَكُ صَادِقًا يُصِبُكُمْ بَعْضُ الَّذِي يَعِدُكُمْ. And if he is truthful, then some of what he promises you will happen to you. He warned them of the 9 plagues, the 9 signs that will happen to Bani Israel. And we know the 9 plagues, and they happen one after another because he warned them. He says, look, if you do not accept, 1, 2, 3 is going to happen. And they did, after he warned them. But in fact, because of the stubbornness of Pharaoh, he wrote them off. And then he declares, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَهْدِي مَنْ هُوَ مُسْرِفٌ كَذَّابٌ. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not guide the one who is musrif, the one who exaggerates, in terms of being wrong, and he lies, and he's, the musrif meaning an exaggeration in sin, but it could be just an exaggerator in general. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who exaggerate all sorts of things in order to gain followers. And so he's saying, look, if this person is an exaggerator, if he is a liar, a perpetual, liar, habitual, narcissistic liar. If Musa is one of these people, Allah will not guide him. God never guides these types of people. And in fact, they will always be exposed. And we see this in our day and age. Narcissistic liars are being exposed all the time, especially by those that are closest to them. Because Allah has a rule here. Allah will never guide a narcissistic liar. Allah will never guide a person who exaggerates everything. Then he continues. So after he presents this, he says, look, because Allah will never help him if he's a liar, don't worry about him. Allah will take care of him. It's as if he's making that argument that, look, God, if he's lying about God, God will never help this person. This is the truth. will always come out. This is why we see every religion that has elements of the truth will remain to a certain extent for a wisdom that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has. But whenever there's these falsehoods, Allah will always expose them. And we see this all the time. Their lies will be exposed. Right? The falsehood, the cheating, etc. These will be exposed. Alhamdulillah. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is guaranteeing here. So first he appeals to their logical senses. He's like, look, if he is lying, don't worry about him. But if he's telling the truth, there's going to be consequences for us not believing. And some of what he promises will happen. And then it came to happen. Then he tries to appeal. So number one is an appeal to the logos, which is the logical senses of these individuals. Next he's going to appeal to their emotions, which I believe is pathos. So he's going now to appeal to their sense of their emotions. Where do we stand right now? What does he say when he does? He says, يا قوم لكم الملك اليوم ظاهرين في الأرض فمن ينصرنا من بأس الله إن جاءنا. He says, oh my people. So look at how he says this. Oh my people. He's calling them. He's one of them. He's saying, look, I'm concerned for you. I'm worried for you. And and this is not just him using this type of language. He genuinely is concerned for them. And he's going to show his concern not only for the akhirah, but also for the dunya. So right now he's actually appealing to their sense of their existence in the dunya, emotionally speaking, because this is what they know. They don't know the hereafter yet. They haven't talked about it that much. They perhaps might not believe in it that much. Although they did, ancient Egyptian society did have, a belief in the hereafter and whatnot, in the afterlife. But he's now appealing to their dunya and their status in the dunya. So he's saying, لَكُمُ الْمُلْكُ الْيَوْمَ ظَاهِرِينَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. You have authority, you have power, dominion in the earth today. Ancient Egyptian society, especially at this time, right? They were the most, perhaps arguably the most powerful country on the planet. Nobody had risen up to their status, in society, the height and the might and the power, etc., etc. Right? We're talking, this is very early, 1000 BC. So this is clearly, or maybe even before this, 1400, I think, or whatever it was. About 500 years after Yusuf. And we'll talk about this because he brings up Yusuf alayhi salam. So he says, we have all this dominion, we have all this power, we have all this status. Then he asks him a question. فَمَنْ يَنْصُرُنَا مِنْ بَأْسِ اللَّهِ إِنْ جَاءَنَا. Who is going to help us if the anger of Allah befalls us? If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to take away all of this might and all of this power, who's going to help us? What's going to happen? Who can help us? Who can assist us? We are the most powerful, but here clearly he's trying to tell them that, look, if we're the most powerful, then there's clearly has to be somebody who's more powerful than us, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But he's telling them, if we want to protect our status, we have to appeal to Allah. This is why we have an Islamic concept, is that, Allah will not change the affair of the people until they change what is in their hearts. This goes both ways, and a lot of people don't realize this. So a lot of times we usually use this nowadays in our modern time as an appeal to, okay, now Muslims, we're really low, but if we want to make it higher, we want to become greater, we have to change what's in our hearts. This is correct, but the opposite is also true. At one point, Muslims were actually at the top of the world. And then we fell. What happened? That's because our hearts changed. So it goes both ways. And so here, the believer of Pharaoh is actually appealing to his people by telling them, look, we're at the top. The only way from here is to the bottom. So what are we going to do? And so he's appealing to this. After he says this, Pharaoh cuts him off. قال فرعون ما أريكم إلا ما أرى. Pharaoh said, I am only showing you what I see. So he's not making an argument. He's just saying, this is my opinion. This is what I see. So he's not making it an issue of facts. He's making it an issue of there's a difference of opinion. Here's the thing. In Islam, and even logically speaking, not every difference of opinion is actually a difference of opinion. Like if a person says, you know, the sky is blue, and a person says, no, I think it's red. And then they have a back and forth, and a person sees this and says, oh, I guess it's a difference of opinion. We would say, no, it's not a difference of opinion. Sky generally actually is colorless. Right? Technically, the air has no color. Why does it appear blue? Actually, the question should be, how does it appear blue? How does it appear red? How often, etc.? Then you'll realize there's no difference of opinion. Okay? Pharaoh is trying to flip that which is clearly discernible truth and what the person is actually saying and making sense, to now saying it's a matter of opinion, this is my opinion, this is what I see. So now he wants to make the killing of Musa an issue of opinion. And issues of justice and injustice are never an issue of opinion. There are no two sides about this. Justice is clear. There's no like, well, justice according to my culture is different than justice according... No. This is why major sins are major sins across every culture in the world. Every single society on the planet agrees that murder is wrong, agrees that stealing, robbery is wrong, agrees that zina is wrong. And it's amazing how this happens. We have a sense, a core sense of justice and whatnot. Okay? So, of course, these can change somewhat, but the main core remains. So, قال فرعون ما أريكم إلا ما أرى وما أهديكم إلا سبيل الرشاد. And I'm only guiding you to the straight path. He's now using almost Musa's language to turn it against Musa. Musa came to guide him, and now he's saying, oh, well, I'm just guiding you guys. He's using another person's language against him. He's using the terms that the other side is using now to justify his own causes. So when people stand up for justice and whatnot, you'll a lot of times find that the oppressor will try to use that same language to justify his oppression. This happens also in our society. This is why there are so many people that are confused about what's going on. So, Pharaoh cuts him off and he says, look, I'm just showing you my opinion, etc. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, وَقَالَ الَّذِي آمَنَ, and the one who believed then said. And because he says, and the one who believed, where he's mentioned Pharaoh without a wow, it shows that Pharaoh cut him off, but now it's as if now he's starting the conversation again. So there's multiple possibilities. It could be that now he's having a conversation again with them on a different occasion, right? Because of the wow, we don't know. Or it could be that he waited a little bit, maybe other people interjected, whatever. But now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is still presenting the arguments that the believer of the family of Pharaoh is offering again. So this is where he says, وَقَالَ الَّذِي آمَنَ يَا قَوْمِ إِنِّي أَخَافُ عَلَيْكُمْ مِثْلَ يَوْمِ الْأَحْزَابِ. The one who believed said, O my people. Again, he is using this word, O my people. I fear upon you what happened to the people of Al-Ahzab. The people of... Now, Al-Ahzab, Hizb means like a party of, or confederates. Ahzab is translated a lot of times as confederates, meaning different groups coming together. They're united for some sort of reason. But here he's saying, what confederates is he talking about? So the believer is saying, look, I am afraid that what's going to happen to you is the same as what happened to the confederates. What confederates? What Ahzab? He says, then he explains, مثل دأب قوم نوح وعاد وثمود والذين من بعدهم. Like what happened to the people of Nuh, the people of Noah, and Ad, and Thamud, and the ones after them. So a few things here. Number one, it shows that even ancient Egyptian society knew about these stories. Because it actually happened, you know what I mean, before them. But because of geographical proximity as well. They're not too far away from where Thamud was. They're not too far away from where Ad was. They knew the story of Nuh. In fact, modern research has shown that the story of a great flood destroying a people is found in every society on the planet. It's found in every society has a story. Now they don't explicitly say the story of Nuh, but of a great flood that happened and took over the people. And of course anthropologists now have to study this, and they theorize and they say, well, maybe it's because every society experiences floods and these things happen, and etc., etc. But Here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is clearly mentioning that ancient Egyptian society knew about the story of Nuh that happened. And He's warning them that what happened to Nuh could happen to us. What happened to Ad could happen to us. What happened to Thamud could happen to us. And وَمِن بَعْدِهِمْ, and others after them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't mention them. Perhaps He mentioned other names of societies, peoples that were destroyed right after them. And then He reminds them, وَمَا اللَّهُ يُرِيدُ ظُلْمًا لِلْعِبَادِ, and Allah, God, never and does not want oppression for the people. Meaning He does not oppress the people, and that whatever we might see that happens to them, in fact, is not oppression. Allah does not oppress. And in other verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَلَكِنَّ النَّاسَ كَانُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ يَظْلِمُونَ. You know, the people themselves, they were the oppressors. They oppressed themselves, they wronged themselves, and they got the destruction that happened accordingly. Meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who took care of them. Okay? So, He's warning them in the herein. So now remember, He's still appealing to maybe their emotional senses. He's like, look, what happened to these other people, it could happen to us. Musa did warn them of plagues. And he is one of them, and He's saying, look, this is real, this could happen to us, we have to be careful. That's basically what's happening. طيب. He continues, وَيَا قَوْمِ إِنِّي أَخَافُ عَلَيْكُمْ يَوْمَ التَّنَادِ, and my people, I fear upon you يَوْمَ التَّنَادِ, the day of calling. So Yawm al-Ahzab, the day of Ahzab, is not the day of judgment. It's the day of the Confederates. So the Confederates, to answer that question, we never answered it, are those people. Nuh, the people of Nuh, the people of Thamud, the people of Ad. These are all Confederates in the sense that they were all unified in their disobedience of Allah, and they're all unified in the sense that they were destroyed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well, in different ways. So that's how they are Confederates. So the day of Confederates is not the day of judgment, it's the day when those people were destroyed. And so He's saying, I'm afraid that the same thing is going to happen to us. Now He's saying, وَيَا قَوْمِ إِنِّي أَخَافُ عَلَيْكُمْ يَوْمَ التَّنَادِ. Now this is a different day. He's saying, and my people, I fear upon you the day of calling, the day of tanad, of calling out. This is the day of judgment. It's one of the names of the day of judgment. Why is it called this? يَوْمَ التَّنَادِ. And why does He use this? يَوْمَ تُوَلُّونَ مُدْبِرِينَ مَا لَكُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ مِنْ عَاصِمٍ. The day that you will turn your backs, you will run, but there's no protecting. There's no protection for you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to save us on that day. Yawm al-Tanad, the day of calling. It's called this, meaning this is one of the names of the day of judgment. Why? Because everybody will be calling out to everybody else. People will be calling out to their mothers, their fathers, their spouses, their siblings, their children, calling out to even the prophets, to other people. People will be calling out each other because they want their rights that were taken away from them from the other individual. There's the calling of Allah to all the people. There's the calling of the angels to gather them. There's the calling of Jahannam to the people that will be taken to Jahannam. There's the calling of Jannah to the people that will be taken to Jannah. There's so many people calling each other out, etc. All of these things are happening, and this is why it is called Yawm al-Tanad, the day of the calling. And He's reminding them of all of this just by using this one name. And it is the day that all of you, tuwalluna mudbirin, you're going to be running around. You're going to be turning your backs on each other. And there can be no protection to you from Allah, from God. مَا لَكُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ مِنْ عَاصِمٍ وَمَن يُضْلِلِ اللَّهُ فَمَا لَهُ مِنْ هَادٍ. And whoever Allah misguides, none can guide that individual. If we are misguided, so now He's trying to establish. Now He's giving them hints that He is guided without explicitly saying it. Eventually at the end of the story, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but eventually at the end of the story, He does actually declare that He is a believer. After He establishes all these arguments, all these points that He has. Okay? But right now, He's giving now hints that maybe He is a believer. And He's saying, look, if you're misguided, only Allah can guide you. If Allah misguided you, only He can guide you. No one else can. So He's saying maybe you're misguided because Allah wants you to be misguided. But obviously He's trying to encourage them to want the guidance, because once they want the guidance, inshallah ta'ala, Allah will guide them. Then He reminds them of another thing. وَلَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ يُوسُفُ مِنْ قَبْلُ بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ. Yusuf came to you before with clear signs. فَمَا زِلْتُمْ فِي شَكٍّ مِمَّا جَاءَكُمْ بِهِ. But you're still in doubt of that which He came to you with. you're still doubting the teachings of Yusuf. So there is a time gap between Yusuf and Musa alayhim salam of about 500 years. Number one. But number two, Yusuf alayhi salam, when he came at a time when ancient Egypt was not ruled by the pharaohs, it was ruled by the Hyksos. And they were a group who were ruling in Lower Egypt. And that's where Yusuf alayhi salam was, etc. We know this. And it was eventually until the Hyksos dynasty was taken out. And then they restarted the whole pharaonic dynasty over again. So here, this person from that is reminding them of the teachings of Yusuf before, hundreds of years ago. Which shows us that a lot of the teachings perhaps survived, number one. Number two, that there was this cross-cultural communication that was happening, similar religious. We see that the Hyksos actually became very much Egyptian, and they adopted a lot of Egyptian culture, etc. And a person can look this up. Historically, I find a lot of this very fascinating, yani. And there's a lot of research done on it to find out what they actually followed, religiously speaking. The Hyksos versus, the pharaohs, and then some of the pharaohs actually were calling to one God, but then of course they delved into polytheism after this as well, and they did a lot of other things, and they called to the worship of themselves, etc. But it shows us that many of the Egyptians still had remnants of the teachings of Yusuf alayhi salam. Now, a person might ask, well, did Yusuf actually give explicit public da'wah or not? And this is an issue of debate. It seems if we read the story of Surah Yusuf, the only few times that he gave da'wah were here and there. And it's not that much. However, the fact that this person is mentioning the teachings of Yusuf shows that he actually did teach and he actually did have followers. Right? And this becomes apparent. And the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the story, it says, Yusuf wa ikhwatihi. The story of Yusuf and his brothers, meaning the main focus of that story is to mention Yusuf and his brothers and not necessarily his da'wah and his struggle in da'wah. Not necessarily, but obviously the teachings remain. So we assume that would be the case. And then he says, فَمَا زِلْتُمْ فِي شَكٍّ مِّمَّا جَاءَكُمْ بِهِ. You're still in doubt of what Yusuf actually told you. So now he's telling them, look, this is actually matching what Yusuf said, number one. But you guys were still doubting what Yusuf was saying. So this should be a cause for you to no longer doubt the teachings of Yusuf, because these are the same teachings. And then حَتَّى إِذَا هَلَكَ قُلْتُمْ لَن يَبْعَثَ اللَّهُ مِن بَعْدِهِ رَسُولًا. When he died, when Yusuf died, and halaka here, it could be that Yusuf died, or that his teachings died out, or that the dynasty that Yusuf was a part of, which is the Hyksos, like we said, died out. You said, oh, God is never going to send another messenger after him. And this is why they didn't believe. They said, well, if it's the truth, then we would get another messenger. And so he's kind of reminding them of this logic that they used, that they said that if it is the truth, God will keep it perpetual. And it took a few hundred years, but then the messenger came back. And now you're doubting what he told you. And you shouldn't doubt, basically, is what he's saying. You should adopt his teachings. And then he says, كَذَلِكَ يُضُلُّ اللَّهُ مَنْ هُوَ مُسْرِفٌ مُرْتَابٌ. And such is the way that Allah misguides the one who is musrif, again exaggerating, a person who's going to extremes, murtab, in his doubts, in his, the questions that he has in his mind. Then there is a verse that seems to be not the words of the mu'min of Al-Fir'aun, the believer of Al-Fir'aun, but rather it's a verse that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala adds in this surah. And in fact, this same wording appears 4 times in the same surah. الَّذِينَ يُجَادِلُونَ فِي آيَاتِ اللَّهِ بِغَيْرِ سُلْطَانٍ أَتَاهُم. The ones who argue about the ayat, the signs of Allah, without any knowledge that has come to them, or any power, any authority. Sultan means authority, which means, so we translate sultan. Literally translation is authority, but you'll find in some translations it mentions this as knowledge, and that's because knowledge gives you that authority. And authority here means an expert, a person who actually knows what they're talking about. And this is one of the things that we suffer from in this day and age, where people no longer trust people who are experts or people of knowledge, and they say, oh, I don't like your authority. Why? Because they're rejecting their authority. The thing is, one of the one of the beautiful things about knowledge is it does give the person authority. And we have become rebellious in the sense that we hate anybody's authority. I'm the only one who matters. I'm the only one who has authority. And this is why we reject knowledge, not because we're rejecting the knowledge, but because we're rejecting the person's authority that comes with that knowledge. And that's what people actually dislike. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using here in the word, when He uses the word authority. Sultan, power. So it says, the ones who argue about the signs of Allah, ayatillah. Now here, ayatillah doesn't mean the Quran, because obviously there's no Quran at this time. So it means the signs that Allah sent. So it could be the miracles that were handed at the time, at the hands of Musa alayhi salam. It could be the clear arguments that Musa is making, the clear arguments that this person, this believer is making. All of these give them authority, because they're based upon sound knowledge. بغير سلطان أتاهم, without any authority that has come to them. كبر مقتا عند الله وعند الذين آمنوا. This is extremely despiteful in the eyes of Allah, with Allah, and for the believers. Which shows us that arguing about the signs of Allah without any proper knowledge is something that's very disgusting, is very repulsive, both to Allah and to the believers. And Allah is including the believers here because they're just like, man, what am I doing? You know what I mean? You become like so incensed, so angry, because clearly the person doesn't know what they're talking about. And this is the case so many times. When people of knowledge debate people who have no knowledge, it's very frustrating. Why? Because they don't know what they're talking about. They think that they have a little bit of knowledge, but in fact they have no knowledge whatsoever. They haven't studied it in depth, right? They haven't actually consulted with actual experts on the topic, etc. And this is plaguing our times in this day and age more than I think a lot of other things, where we have supposed experts that are brought on TV and made to seem like they know what they're talking about, and they have no knowledge whatsoever. They have no credentials. When they brought in Dr. So-and-so and Dr. So-and-so, and it turns out this guy neither has a medical degree, and this guy lost his medical license a long time ago, and they're supposedly giving people medical advice. This is frustrating to the actual doctors that are on the field and actually doing the work, who actually have the expertise, and they have, because of their expertise and their knowledge, they actually have authority. If you do not like the authority, go and learn. But don't just reject it just because you don't like their authority. So here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so this is not the words of the believer of Al-Fir'aun, but it shows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about a concept that the believer of Al-Fir'aun in his conversation is just getting frustrated. And Allah is mentioning how here, this whole concept is nothing new, and this is why it's an interjection by Allah in the middle of the story. But it's a good interjection because it adds, and it tells us a little bit about the mind state of that individual, and it tells us about, of course, a very general concept that there will be people who will argue about the verses of Allah without any authority, and this is something that's despiseful to Allah, and it's also despiseful to the believers. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كَذَلِكَ يَطْبَعُ اللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ قَلْبِ مُتَكَبِّرٍ جَبَّارٍ. Such is the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts a stamp on the heart of every mutakabbir, arrogant person, jabbar, who is trying to be arrogant in the earth and a tyrant and do all of these tyrannical things. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to put a seal on their heart when they start to argue about the verses of Allah and the signs of Allah without any knowledge. Eventually they think that they're right. Eventually they will no longer accept any truth, because they think they have, because I was able to argue with this person and have a debate and have a conversation, I'm good. I don't even need to learn anything anymore. I don't need to look into the truth anymore. I just have what I have, and I have it for whatever reason, and I'm done. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, now there's a seal on the heart of this individual. They will no longer accept the truth. So this is obviously a problem for that individual, and Allah will no longer guide them. This is the end of the sequence of the verses. This is about halfway through the story. We'll stop here, inshallah ta'ala. Like we said, there's a few things to summarize, inshallah ta'ala, the points that were mentioned in terms of what can we use as dawah techniques. Number one is to empathize with the people that we're talking to. Number two, to talk to them as we are of them, because we are in fact of them. We shouldn't talk to people as if we're an outsider or they're an other and they're not us and we're not them. No. We have to talk to them as one of them. Wallahi, and doing this will actually get to them, inshallah ta'ala, better. We have to sometimes run people through the hypotheticals and the consequences of these hypotheticals. So we have to say, look, if I'm right, 1, 2, and 3. If I'm wrong, 1, 2, and 3. Would this be correct? And if they accept, which these people did. It seems like they did accept his premise. Then obviously you would have to accept other things. So for example, we can use this like when we're talking about the proofs of prophethood. Is Prophet Muhammad ﷺ a prophet? Well, if he's a prophet, we'll see 1, 2, and 3 possibilities. If he's a liar, we'll see 1, 2, and 3. Right? If he is deluded, we'll see 1, 2, and 3. So we go through those options, and then we find out that in fact he is a messenger. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. By doing this, we can do the same thing to the Quran. If the Quran is fake, we'll see 1, 2, and 3. If the Quran is true, we'll see 1, 2, and 3. Right? If my religion is true, and you can do this, by the way, on anything. And this is a good dawah technique. So appealing to logic, using these hypotheticals, appealing to people's logical senses, to their intellectual arguments, these are all important. This is another one. Another thing that we should do is to appeal to people's emotions. Like, look, there are severe consequences for us not believing as well. This is what's going to happen. The reality of life. He's talking to them about the hereafter. What's going to happen to them? And he's talking about the herein. Our society needs our help. If we do not fix our society, this is what's going to happen. If we do not adopt this is what's going to happen. All of these things are things that we also need to be aware of. Then he reminded them of truths that they used to know, like Yusuf alayhi salam. What happened to him? And he's reminding them of all of these other things. And then of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions how there are going to always be people who will argue without any knowledge about the signs of Allah, about what you tell them, etc. And there's nothing you can do about it. And then sometimes they will be misguided, but they've only misguided themselves because of their arguing, and they actually didn't consider what you had to say. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He helps us and guides us, inshallah ta'ala. We'll go ahead and stop here. We look forward to seeing you guys inshallah ta'ala soon. Barakallahu feekum, jazakumullahu khairan, subhanakallahu wa hamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.